In November 1887, 7 men on the third expansion crew of the Kansas City Limestone Works drove a pneumatic drill into a section of the lower gallery wall and felt, instead of resistance, nothing. The drill passed clean through. The air that came back was not damp, it was dry, and it carried with it a sound the men described in 3 separate sworn depositions as a low harmonic resonance. Not wind, not gas, not the settling groan of deep rock. A tone. One of the men, a driller named August Helverson, 41 years old, a German immigrant with 11 years underground, pressed his face to the opening and reported seeing light. Not daylight, not phosphorescence, light. Within 48 hours, the entire crew had been transferred. Their shift supervisor, a man named Carlton Briggs, was placed on administrative leave the following morning and never returned to work. The opening was sealed with concrete poured before any survey was conducted. A representative from the Bureau of American Ethnology arrived in Kansas City on November 19th, 3 days after the breach, according to the travel voucher filed by his office in Washington, a voucher that is still accessible in the National Archives under Record Group 106. Though the corresponding field report it was meant to accompany has no entry in the archival index. But here is what the Bureau of American Ethnology has spent 137 years making sure you never ask about. Kansas City sits on one of the most extensively quarried limestone formations in North America. The Bethany Falls limestone member runs beneath the city at depths between 40 and 200 feet, riddled with natural karst features, passages, chambers, shelves that have been documented, mapped, and commercially exploited since the 1840s. This is not speculation. The city's underground park system, its cold storage facilities, its wartime supply vaults, all of them are carved from rock that was already hollow in places no drill had touched. The quarrymen who built the Kansas City limestone industry did not find an empty city. They found one that was already there, or that had been there, long before any tool they had ever seen broke the ground above it. The men who drilled into that wall in November 1887 were not treasure hunters. They were not journalists. They were not men with a theory. They were contracted laborers working a 12-hour shift in a commercial limestone operation, expanding a gallery for the storage of dried goods. They had every financial incentive to keep drilling, every professional incentive to document what they found, and no conceivable motive to fabricate a story that would cost them their jobs within 2 days of telling it. The Kansas City limestone trade in 1887 was one of the most economically significant quarrying operations in the central United States. The Bethany Falls member, a dense, even-grained limestone laid down in the Pennsylvanian period, roughly 312 million years ago, had been producing building material for the city's explosive post-war growth since the 1860s. By 1887, the underground workings beneath what is now the Westport and Crossroads district extended for more than 40 acres, at depths ranging from 60 to 120 feet. The operations employed over 300 men, working in shifts around the clock, driven by a construction boom that was transforming Kansas City from a river-crossing town into a regional economic center. The crew working the lower gallery on November 14, 1887, was part of a secondary expansion ordered by the Kansas City Limestone and Building Material Company, chartered in Missouri in 1879, principal office at 211 East 9th Street. The work order logged in the company's operational ledger, a ledger that surfaced briefly in a 1964 estate auction, before being purchased by an unnamed buyer and has not been seen in any public collection since, called for the extension of Gallery 7 by approximately 60 linear feet to accommodate refrigerated storage contracts from 2 Kansas City meatpacking firms. The men drilling that gallery were not explorers. They were doing a job they had done 1,000 times. They were extending a known space in a known direction through rock they expected to behave exactly as it always had. The drill went through, and what came back was not rock dust, it was air. Still, dry, room-temperature air at a depth of 114 feet below the surface of Missouri. The earliest documented account of anomalous underground finds in the Kansas City limestone system does not begin in 1887. It begins in 1869. The Kansas City Journal of Commerce, in its edition of March 8, 1869, carried a brief item in its regional notes column, attributed to a correspondent identified only as TMW, describing the discovery by quarry workers on the Kersey Claim, a private limestone operation on the south bluff of the Missouri River, of what the correspondent called a worked passage of dressed stone, running at least 40 feet in a southerly direction, with markings on the upper walls consistent with deliberate inscription, not natural fracturing. The passage, according to the account, measured 7 feet in height and approximately 5 feet in width. The floor was described as level and smooth, not by erosion but by finish. The correspondent noted that the workers' foreman had sent a letter to the Missouri Geological Survey requesting an inspection. There is no record of any survey response in the period's administrative logs. The correspondent, TMW, was almost certainly Thomas Myron Wakefield, a civil engineer then employed by the Kansas City Board of Public Works, whose personal papers, donated to the Western Historical Manuscript Collection at the University of Missouri, Kansas City in 1947 by his granddaughter, contain a handwritten journal entry dated February 28, 1869, 9 days before the Journal of Commerce item that reads, "Visited the Kersey workings with F. Halsey. The passage is real. The stone is dressed. No one can say by whom or when, and Halsey will not let me go back." The F. Halsey referenced is almost certainly Frank Halsey, the superintendent of the Kersey operation, about whom nothing further appears in the public record after October 1869. What Wakefield's journal does not describe, but what the subsequent pattern of finds in the Kansas City basin will establish as consistent, is what was found inside the passage. The Journal of Commerce item refers only to the passage itself, the markings, the finish of the floor. Two other items from the same period, one in the Kansas City Daily Western Journal of Commerce from May 1869, and one in a privately circulated mining newsletter called the Missouri Quarrymen's Register, describe objects removed from the passage before it was sealed. The Daily Western Journal item refers to stone tablets of uniform manufacture, bearing characters of no alphabet known to this correspondent's acquaintance. The Quarrymen's Register, in a notice that reads more like a warning than a report, states that workers on the Kersey Claim have been advised to disregard what was found in the sealed gallery, and management has communicated that no further inquiry will be tolerated. The Kersey Claim was acquired by the Central Missouri Land and Storage Company in 1871. Central Missouri Land and Storage was a Missouri corporation whose 3 registered principals were all attorneys with offices in Washington, D.C. It was dissolved in 1884. Its land holdings in the Kansas City Limestone District were transferred without recorded sale to the Kansas City Limestone and Building Material Company, the same company operating Gallery 7 in November 1887. This is the first item in the document trail. It is not the only one. Between 1869 and 1887, 7 separate incidents of anomalous underground discovery in the Kansas City limestone system appear in local newspaper accounts, union grievance filings, and private correspondence. 5 of them follow the same sequence: discovery, brief local press account, arrival of outside authority within days, sealing of the site, transfer or termination of workers. 2 of them resulted in formal complaints filed with the Missouri Bureau of Labor Statistics. The complaint forms, filed in 1874 and 1882 respectively, are referenced in the Bureau's annual reports for those years, referenced by filing number, not by content. The actual complaint documents are listed as transferred to federal custody in the Bureau's records for 1889, 2 years after the 1887 incident. No federal agency has acknowledged receiving them. The 1874 incident occurred at the Morrison Brothers Quarry on the Blue River tributary, southeast of the city center. 4 workers broke into what their foreman described in a letter to the Missouri Bureau of Mines as a chamber of considerable size, with objects of evident manufacture placed at intervals along the walls, at a spacing too regular to be accidental. The letter, filed as Correspondence Exhibit 14-C in the Bureau's 1874 annual report, is quoted in summary, but the original is not in the Bureau's archival holdings at the Missouri State Archives. What is in those holdings is a notation in the Bureau Superintendent's Administrative Log for September 4, 1874. Dr. Cyrus Thomas, in office, re Morrison matter. Transfer of materials authorized. Workers to be reassigned per agreement with company. Cyrus Thomas was at that time a senior staff anthropologist with the Bureau of American Ethnology, Smithsonian Institution, based in Washington. His travel records for the period, partially preserved in the Smithsonian Institution archives under Record Group 7081, show a trip to Kansas City in late August 1874. Expenses claimed for train fare and 3 nights lodging at the Pacific House Hotel. No field report corresponding to this trip exists in the Bureau of American Ethnology's indexed holdings. The 1882 incident is more extensively documented, and the documentation is more extensively missing. On July 19, 1882, workers at the Kansas City Stone Company's Vine Street operation, at a depth of 87 feet, broke through the ceiling of a cavity that their foreman, a man named James Portwood, described in a handwritten account, later deposited with the Jackson County Recorder of Deeds as collateral to a legal dispute over worker compensation. A room of not less than 30 feet across, with a ceiling of 8 feet at its lowest point, and walls bearing inscriptions covering every surface from floor height to above a man's reach, in a consistent hand, in characters I cannot name, with a regularity and care that showed purpose. Portwood's account continues. On the floor of the room were objects of stone and of metal, the metal being of a color I have never seen in iron or in copper or in brass, with a surface finish that showed no tool marks, arranged in a pattern around a central point that appeared to be a fixed installation, as though it had not been moved in some time. Portwood described the central installation as a column of the same unidentified metal, approximately 4 feet high and 18 inches in diameter at its base, narrowing slightly toward the top, with a flat upper surface that bore a single character, larger than the wall inscriptions and deeply incised, that Portwood rendered in his handwritten account as a drawing that is still visible in the Jackson County document, and that corresponds to no character in any alphabet catalogued by the Smithsonian Institution's Division of Mound Explorations, though the correspondence requesting that comparison, filed by a Kansas City attorney named Harold Ashmore in 1909, is in the Smithsonian's incoming mail log, but has no response on record. Portwood's account was filed as part of a wage dispute because 3 of his workers refused to return to the site and were terminated, and the dispute went to arbitration. The arbitration record, Jackson County Case 1882-CR-441, is accessible. The workers won. The settlement terms are sealed. Portwood himself died in 1894 of documented causes. His account of the Vine Street chamber is the most detailed first-person description of an underground anomalous find in the Kansas City limestone system. And it is sitting in a county recorder's archive, in a box with a wage dispute, where it has been since August 1882. What was found in the Vine Street chamber, the metal objects, the column, the inscribed tablets, was removed within 72 hours of discovery. The removal was conducted under the supervision of a representative from the Bureau of American Ethnology, whose name appears in Portwood's account as a Dr. Henshaw from Washington, who arrived on the evening of the 21st with 3 men I did not know, and papers from the Bureau of Mines granting him authority over the site. Henry Weatherby Henshaw was at that time a staff ethnologist with the Bureau of American Ethnology, and was, according to his published biography in the Smithsonian Miscellaneous Collections series, conducting field work in the Missouri River Valley during the summer of 1882. His field notes for that summer, referenced in the biography as subsequently lost in the 1897 fire, are nevertheless listed as a distinct archival item, with a box number and a content description, in the Bureau of American Ethnology's 1892 Catalog of Holdings. They are not in the box today. The box is there. The contents are not. Now return to November 1887. Return to August Helverson, his face at the opening in Gallery 7, 62 inches of hole in a wall that should have had 40 more feet of solid limestone behind it, looking at light that had no source. What Helverson described to his co-workers, and what three of them, Karl Detmer, 44, Heinrich Schaefer, 38, and the laborer identified in one account only as the Pole, Jan, corroborated in separately obtained accounts, was a corridor. Not a natural cavity, a corridor. Dressed stone walls, the same construction as the Kersey Passage 18 years earlier. A ceiling at approximately 8 feet. A floor that was level. And light. Not a point source, not a lantern, not a reflection from their own equipment, but a diffuse, even illumination with no visible origin, emanating, as all three men described it, from the walls themselves. The corridor extended in a direction the men agreed was roughly south, which would place it heading toward the Missouri River bluffs. They could not see the end of it. Helverson's stated estimate, which he gave to a reporter from the Kansas City Times who came to his boarding house 2 days after the site was sealed. The article ran on November 17, 1887, page 3, under the headline, "Quarrymen Report Strange Underground Discovery," was that the corridor was at least as long as a city block, perhaps more. The reporter, whose name is not attached to the article, but whose style matches other unsigned pieces from the Times in the same period, noted that Helverson showed signs of agitation unusual for a man of his professional experience, and that he declined to discuss what he had seen beyond the entrance, saying only that the company had instructed him to say nothing further. The Kansas City Times, November 17, 1887. Page 3. The article is in the Times archive on microfilm at the Kansas City Public Library. It is there, you can read it, and it is the last time any of the 7 men's accounts appeared in any publication. Heinrich Schaefer gave a deposition, not a newspaper interview, a legal deposition, in connection with a workers' compensation claim filed after he suffered what his physician described as severe nervous collapse in the days following the November 14th incident. The deposition is in the Jackson County Civil Court records for 1888, case 1888-CV-117. In it, Schaefer describes the interior of the space beyond the corridor entrance in terms that Helverson's newspaper account does not reach. Schaefer stated that he entered the corridor for a distance he estimated at 20 feet, while Helverson was still at the opening. He stated that the walls bore markings, not words as I know them, but a kind of plan or map with lines of great precision and symbols placed at intervals, and what I took to be numbers, though in no system I recognized. He stated that there were openings in the corridor walls, doorways he called them, though without doors, leading to spaces he did not enter. He stated that in one of those spaces, visible from the corridor, he saw objects on a surface at waist height that he described as instruments or tools or perhaps measuring devices. I cannot say their purpose, but their manufacture was of a quality beyond anything I have seen in a machine works or a factory. He stated that the light in the space was steady, not flickering, not diminishing with distance, and that it was of a color like daylight but without sun. Schaefer lost his compensation case. The deposition is still in the file. The case was decided by a judge named Horace Welliver, who served on the Jackson County bench from 1884 to 1897, and who, according to a brief profile in the Missouri Bar Association's 1901 memorial volume, was also a member of the Board of Directors of the Central Missouri Land and Storage Company from 1877 until that company's dissolution in 1884, the same company that had acquired and sealed the Kersey claim. The same company whose land holdings transferred to the Kansas City Limestone and Building Material Company. The same company in whose Gallery 7 August Helverson's drill went through a wall that should not have been hollow. This is not a chain of coincidences. This is a chain of documents. The material fact that no official investigation has ever addressed is this: the light. Not the corridor, not the inscriptions, not the objects Schaefer described on a surface at waist height. The light. At a depth of 114 feet in a sealed limestone formation in Missouri in November 1887, there was a steady, non-flickering, sourceless illumination that 3 independent witnesses, in 3 independent accounts, described with the same specific characteristics: diffuse, emanating from the walls, daylight in color, not diminishing with distance. And none of those witnesses had a motive to invent it, because none of them stood to gain anything from the invention. The Bureau of American Ethnology arrived 3 days after the breach. A representative identified in the company's administrative log, a log that was briefly in the possession of a Kansas City historian named Robert Caldwell in the 1940s, before being acquired by a private buyer, as J. Powell's man from Washington, arrived on November 17th. J. Powell is John Wesley Powell, the director of the Bureau of American Ethnology from 1879 to 1902, and one of the most powerful figures in American science in that period. The Bureau under Powell had, by 1887, established a systematic practice of acquiring anomalous physical material from domestic excavation and quarrying sites. Material that entered the Bureau's collections under classifications that did not correspond to standard ethnographic categories, and that in many cases never appeared in the published catalogs. The Bureau's acquisition records for 1887 and 1888, partially reconstructed by the Smithsonian Institution archives in a 1993 inventory project, show a notation for Kansas City, Missouri, November to December 1887, under an acquisition number 1887-KCM-14, for which no item description, no field report, and no disposition record exists. The acquisition number exists. The acquisition does not. What Powell's institution had been doing since at least 1869, and what the Kansas City pattern demonstrates with documentary precision, is the maintenance of a specific institutional response protocol. Discovery reported locally. Federal representative dispatched within days. Site sealed under federal authority or corporate authority backed by federal paper. Workers transferred or compensated into silence. Physical material moved to Washington under an acquisition number that leads nowhere. The protocol is not a theory. It is a documented sequence, repeated across at least 7 known incidents in the Kansas City Basin alone between 1869 and 1887, and repeated, as the broader national pattern will show, across dozens of similar incidents in the same period from Ohio to Arizona. The legal and financial architecture that maintains the suppression of the Kansas City limestone sites operates through a single instrument: land control. The site of Gallery 7 is located beneath the 1700 block of Wyandotte Street in Kansas City's Crossroads Arts District. The surface parcel is owned by Midland Development Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware in 2003, with a registered agent of National Registered Agents Incorporated in Wilmington. Midland Development Holdings has no website, no employees, no commercial activity, and no development permits on record with the Kansas City Planning and Development Department. It has held the parcel since 2003 and has done nothing with it. The assessed value is $1.4 million. It is a vacant lot with a chain-link fence. At the southwest corner of the parcel, on a metal pole, there is a security camera. Based on satellite imagery comparison, the camera was installed between March and August of 2023. Nothing changed on the surface of the parcel that would explain the installation. No development activity, no permits. The camera was installed to watch the fence and the ground. A FOIA request filed with the Department of the Interior in 2021, log number DOI-2021-005847, requested all documents relating to federal land designations or access restrictions affecting the subsurface strata beneath the 1700 block of Wyandotte Street at depths greater than 50 feet. The response cited Exemption B3 and identified 16 U.S.C. Section 470, the National Historic Preservation Act, as the withholding authority. Section 470 does not grant categorical exemption from FOIA disclosure for subsurface survey records. The citation is legally incorrect. The Department of the Interior has not responded to a follow-up letter identifying the error, sent in October 2022. There is one account that falls outside the official record. It comes from a man named Walter Briggs, the son of Carlton Briggs, the shift supervisor who was placed on administrative leave the morning after Gallery 7 was breached in November 1887 and never returned to work. Walter Briggs was born in 1878 and died in Kansas City in 1961 at the age of 83. In the spring of 1959, he was interviewed by a local historian named Evelyn Marsh, who was compiling a history of the Kansas City limestone industry for the Jackson County Historical Society. The interview was recorded on reel-to-reel tape. The tape is in the Society's archive, cataloged as tape 1978-EM-07. Walter Briggs told Marsh that his father had, throughout his life, never spoken about November 1887 except once, on the night before Carlton Briggs's death in 1931. What Walter Briggs said his father told him was this: Carlton Briggs had been escorted to the site on November 16, 1887, by two men he did not know, and had been taken into the corridor. He had walked its entire length. He had been shown the rooms off the main passage. He had been told that he was being shown this so that he would understand the scale of what we are protecting. Those words, his son's account of his father's words, and that he would understand why his silence was not optional. Carlton Briggs had been paid enough, in Walter Briggs's description, to buy the house we lived in and half of the next one. He had been silent for 44 years, from 1887 until the night before his death. Walter Briggs told Marsh one more thing as the recording ends. He said that his father had said that what was inside the corridor was not only old, he said it was still being used or had been used recently in a way that left marks. He did not explain what marks. He did not explain what use. He said that his father had said it in the tone of a man describing something he could not frame in any language he had, and that his father had then been quiet for the rest of the night and had died in the morning. The corridor is still there. The concrete poured into the breach in Gallery 7 in November 1887, specified in the company's materials ledger as Rapid Cure Compound 6 sacks, supplied by federal account, has been in that wall for 137 years. The dressed stone walls below it have not moved. The floor is still level. The metal column described by James Portwood in 1882, 4 feet high, 18 inches at the base, bearing the single large incised character. It is in a Smithsonian storage facility under acquisition number 1882-KCM-04. Or it is not there. The acquisition number exists. The item description does not. The Midland Development Holdings parcel is still a vacant lot. The camera on the pole at the southwest corner is still recording the fence and the ground. It was installed in 2023 to watch a piece of ground that is not changed. Not truth. Not history. The thing itself. At 114 feet below the surface of Missouri, behind Rapid Cure concrete poured on federal account in November 1887, a corridor with dressed stone walls and a level floor, and light that 3 men described as steady and sourceless and the color of daylight, is still in the same position it was in when August Helverson pressed his face to the opening and said he saw light. The soil above it has not moved. The chamber has not been opened since the year the foreman filed his last report. The light, if it persists by whatever mechanism produced it, is still there. Still producing. Still waiting under the vacant lot and the chain-link fence and the camera that someone installed in 2023 to make sure you keep walking past.